Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Katsaruba, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees joining us today, and a special thanks to James Leach, Greg Buchanan, and the entire Telos and Zscaler team for making today's event possible. Before we begin, I just want to really encourage the audience at home to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform down below. And remember as well to answer the poll questions as we go through them in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credits for attending today's webinar. So with that all said, I love to welcome our panelists to go ahead and come on camera, and you can come off mute because we are going to begin with a round of introductions from each of you. So share with us who you are, what agency or organization you are with, and a little bit about your role there. And if we could start with Jonathan first, please take us off.
Hi, thank you. Good to be here. My name is Jonathan Fibus, and I am the CISO and Director of the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Division at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So I have overall responsibility for the internal cyber program, making sure that we take care of all of the domains of security for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Very cool, thank you. And let's jump next to Carlos. You're muted.
Hi, my name is Carlos Capel. I'm with the Department of State, the Foreign Services Institute, where my role is as a senior analyst and project manager and working to take software as a service to ATL.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Sam next, please.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Sam Michael. I'm the CIO at NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. We're one of the centers within the National Institutes of Health. As part of my daily operations, we're responsible for collaborative systems that cover thousands of users for networks that NCAT supports, ranging everything from clinical trials to automated systems for high throughput drug discovery. So quite a bit of that journey has involved the use of SaaS products. So thank you for having me on this panel.
Thank you for being here. And let's hear from Law next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Law Floyd. I work here at Telos Corporation. I am our Chief of Security Operations. I manage our consulting practices surrounding GRC, such as FedRAMP, StateRAMP, CMMC, all the various different frameworks to include ATO advisory services. I am also serving as our technology solutions thought leader for emerging technologies and cybersecurity and RMF work, as well as providing internal CISO functions for our operations.
Great, thank you. And Greg.
My name's Greg Buchanan. I'm the Senior Director for Public Sector Product Management at Zscaler. My role is to channel all the requirements for services into our FedRAMP products and then help guide them through the SER process to make them available.
Fantastic. All right, well, we can jump into it then with my first question. And for our panelists, if you want, we don't need to go in any particular order necessarily. If you want to jump in, you can use the raise hand icon. Or if you're off mute, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it's okay to call on you. But just for the first one to get things going, Jonathan, maybe I can hear from you first. I want to talk about how FedRAMP has evolved since its launch in 2011. And if you could share what you believe has contributed to its success, a little bit about what has contributed to its success in the US federal government.
So I would say that What's very enticing about FedRAMP now versus in 2011 are the number of options available to us. It took a while for systems to get their FedRAMP authorization, and the addition of having an agency authorization in addition to the JAB authorization has brought us a lot more services out there. We are about 75% in the cloud now, and a large reason for that is because of the availability of platform infrastructure and software services that are available to us. It doesn't exempt us from needing to do our risk assessments, from looking at the packages very closely, seeing how the JAB or individual agencies have authorized services in the cloud and how that fits in with our risk tolerance. So it's been a wonderful journey, and I'm glad we're at a much more functional state than we were 12 years ago.
Great, thank you. Carlos, do you want to weigh in on that question as well and kind of share what your experience has been?
Yes. So my experience has been working with cross-functional teams to deal with both shared and inherited controls, and to master that, those implementation statements per software application that we're trying to process through the ATO. And what it is now compared to what it used to be is a lot more streamlined. We have a lot more effective communication regarding controls and how they apply. And then we also have concepts where we begin to talk with upper management on managing those controls and trying to keep them in place for a certain software as we move through the process.
Yeah, thank you both. And maybe someone from the industry side next. Greg, you want to share some of your thoughts?
Sure, absolutely. So back in 2011, I can still remember the meager beginnings and the few offerings that were out there, but I also remember the conversations with government, actual federal agencies that swore they would never move anything to the cloud. It was never going to happen. This was something that was almost a marketing ploy at that point in time. And as we continued to add services, and the FedRAMP process continued to improve, and I agree, I think the JAB process in combination with the the agency ATOs have made it so we have a number of applications that are now available out there for cloud services. And now you see the pace at which those same agencies that a decade ago said, I absolutely will never move anything to the cloud, and 75% or greater of their assets are moving to the cloud if they're not already there.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Law, did you want to add anything next?
Sure. I mean, FedRAMP's grown significantly in its maturity, and it's done exactly what everybody has been saying here, and that growth in its maturity is what has allowed that. I mean, you've got cloud service providers such as Google, Microsoft Azure, AWS, Oracle. They've all gotten a FedRAMP High, not just a FedRAMP Moderate, but a FedRAMP High environment to work out of now, which has increased adoption across the various different providers to provide solutions to the government. The DIB started, the whole defense industry base has started to really buy into a lot of this. And I agree with what Greg said. A lot of people, there's no way we're going to the cloud. But the increased amount of security controls and the flexibility that has allowed for interesting and new builds of applications and different types of applications, different ways of creating those applications has really increased the cloud adoption, which has increased the adoption of FedRAMP and authorizations across it. And that automation that comes with a lot of those interesting increases in adoption, in the way technology flows, it's been very interesting and very good for the industry, because it becomes very onerous trying to manage these different types of security, keeping up with your compliance. And I think there's going to be further adoption with FedRAMP as more automation and the ability to walk across different frameworks and things like that becomes easier. So it's been an interesting road, and I'm very happy to see that it's been successful so far.
Absolutely. And Sam, I see you came off mute. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think these are great points. And I think, what Jonathan said right from the beginning, the maturity and the availability over time. And I did also really want to give, the JAB has done an outstanding job over time. And one thing that we've heard from vendors is that the process, and we can get to the challenges sometimes of the process later, but the process itself has made them have a better product. And I think that's something that more vendors are starting to realize, that going through that. I think Carlos made a really important point too about the control families and having more maturity, even understanding what the control families are, and then even the agency's responsibility and the vendor's responsibility, and that breakdown, I think, has definitely matured over time. And I did want to comment, there was a question there with regards to sponsorship. And I think that's also something, related to this, is I think more agencies have been willing to sponsor packages. I don't have a direct answer for you, Jeff, as the question there. I would say, shop around, because I think one thing is, we at NCATS, we've sponsored several packages and we recognize it's work on us, but we realize it's worth it, and I think that you do need that partnership for these sponsoring agencies. So if you're having difficulty with that, Jeff, the best advice I could give is to try to shop around at an agency that could use that product, the one that you're looking for. I'm not sure if it's Jamf or something else. You mentioned Apple and Mac.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for addressing the audience question too. Is there any other comments from our panelists on this topic before I ask my next question?
Kirsten, I think I'd add one last thing, that is the integration that we're seeing between cloud service products now. This is becoming much more prevalent, where, before, when Zscaler first did its first integration with CrowdStrike, it was kind of a unique thing, but now you're seeing integrations with a variety of products and multiple products. And I think that's improving the experience and the level of security of the FedRAMP services that we're seeing as well.
Absolutely, thank you. All right, well, I'm going to call for our first poll question before we move on. So if we could get that up on the screen, please. For our audience at home, what do you think are the main challenges in achieving cloud adoption in government and public sector organizations? So please take a moment to respond to that. We really want to hear from you and what some of your struggles are looking like. And on to my next question. Let's see, maybe Carlos, you can kick us off with this one. Could you speak to what is the significance of the FedRAMP Authorization Act that made FedRAMP a legal requirement in January 2023, but more specifically, how has it affected cloud adoption in the government sector?
So we talked about JAB, we talked about a number of new adoption strategies. And I think that when we address the cloud, I think coming on that, people really don't understand that it's an issue that affects not only government, but government covers all of society. So I think that's going to be where we're coming from. And I'm hesitant to state that we kind of, you caught me on a good question. I think so. Policy in 2023 took us to where we could consolidate the catalog. We were able to do some things that we hadn't been able to do before. And with that, we still have hesitation, but we're moving toward something that I think is going to be impactful in the future, and that's AI. I think that we'll address that as we move into it at a deeper level, and that's going to impact society as a whole. We already know that TikTok is banned, but here we are. And how does that apply? How does policy apply to that? Then we're going to have to restructure as we move through it. So I can't really state that what we have in 2023 is going to be what we have in 2025 in terms of policy. And I'm not answering your question concretely, but I'm kind of going in a direction that we'll see the advent of further developments like AI. And I'm sure that we'll talk about OSCAL as we move into our discussion later in this. But here we are. We have something that will assist us in developing system security plans, SARS, those types of things. And I think the policy will apply. We'll have to make updates and challenges and changes as we move along.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Jonathan, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I would say that as the government transitioned from a cloud first to a cloud smart policy, as people became more familiar with cloud, primarily through adoption of cloud services in their personal lives, it became a much easier sell to talk about cloud in the federal government because we could talk about things from a risk-based perspective. What's the risk of me putting my email up in the cloud? What's the risk of me not having to do a refresh in my data center? What's the budgetary risk when I change from capital expenditures to operational expenditures? We were able to have discussions pretty much with everyone in leadership at the agency, at meeting them at whatever part of the program they were coming in at, whether it was financial, whether it was risk, whether it was operations. So being able to make some concrete changes by moving to email and productivity suite first gave people a great idea of what cloud means, gave them an idea of how they could access it. And then as we moved into the pandemic, it became, how do I access this from home? So migrating things out of my data center, moving them to the cloud, gave me a better perimeter and a better view of my perimeter. And then having a lot of help in the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program from DHS allowed me to demonstrate that I could secure the cloud and report on security in the cloud to address folks' concerns about security of our information. So I would say the act came at a good time where people were familiar with these changes, were able to think about accelerating these changes, and became much more conversant in why cloud was a good thing and how to talk about where it may not be perfect.
Thank you so much. Let's go Law and then Greg. So Law, go ahead.
I mean, what's happened with, the passing of this is it simply solidifies the FedRAMP program as an overall authority. I mean, it's going to take the assessment and authorization activities for cloud products, for the whole unclassified federal space to a new level, because now people are going to really understand where they need to go to become authorized, what they need to do to become authorized. And there's less confusion on who has the stick here, who am I beholden to really become authorized and really work in this space. And so it gives a single focal point. And with that single focal point, what happens is there's an increased knowledge base that happens. You start seeing bodies of knowledge that start becoming more relevant for, different fringe, applications and things that aren't normally seen. And they start to understand how to implement these, NIST 853 controls, which are purposefully not completely, concrete in how you implement them, but telling you that you need certain things. There's a million ways to do a lot of these things and to make an application. And so having a focus and being able to have more people that understand how to do it, it's not only increasing the likelihood of people getting FedRAMP, it's increasing the people that can help you get there because they have that body of knowledge they need to be able to guide you.
Thank you. Greg, go ahead.
Oh, I'm in agreement with Law on this one. It's the legitimacy that you've given the FedRAMP process. I think it's attributed to the success it's had. And when you look at the adoption at the state level now, at State Ramp, Tax Ramp, and others that are following suit, and the reciprocity because of the value that you get from the FedRAMP process and the entire ATO structure there, that you are able to just move those accredited products into a state ramp and make them available to SLED customers as well. I think that's just going to keep expanding. We've already seen a lot of growth in that space from Zscaler. And I think because of the next iteration of what FedRAMP is becoming, I think you're going to see more of the conversation we're probably going to get into next, which is the automation behind it and being able to use tools like Telos to integrate with the OSCAL requirements. I think this is going to be the thing that is going to make it easier for agencies to understand and adopt those controls into their ATO process. So FedRAMP was a success story that has led to StateRAMP and expansion of that. And I think that now, because of the volume we're seeing, and this is, basically, it went from the cool thing to do to the financially responsible thing to do to the right thing to do. And now that it's the right thing to do, we're figuring out how to do it at scale.
Thank you. All right, so we have had quite a few audience questions come through, which is awesome. I'll do my best to try to kind of consolidate them a little bit. But my next question is just going to be around potential challenges or obstacles that the federal, civilian, and defense agencies and cloud partners might face when adopting FedRAMP, and how to address those challenges, which I see is kind of a running theme here in the chat. People are wanting to know, how can we get our company software as a service to the government, and what challenges are we going to potentially encounter right away? How do we remediate these challenges? There was another one about, I think it was a smaller agency and just barriers to adoption. Some of the concerns, challenges for federal agencies related to the leveraging of AI products and getting them through FedRAMP. So who would like to kick us off with that? Just kind of speak to your own experience and what it is that you can share. We'll go Carlos first and then Sam.
So kind of engage each of the questions. One of the challenges that I have particularly faced is the migration of one repository to another. So you may be familiar with Exacta, which was a repository we could go through and house our data in. We could actually process RMF steps in Exacta. And then here within the past year, we've migrated to Archangel, which is the interface looks very much like Splunk in a way. But one of the challenges is that we've encountered is things just did not migrate the way that we had hoped they would. And I think that's been a challenge in terms of, especially regarding security controls, recorded documents, archived data. We've kind of lost some things in the process of a move that impacted our bottom line. So that's the kind of issue that we've experienced.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Sam, please go ahead. You're next.
Yeah, add to that. And I think the very obvious one is the cost, and it's one we hear frequently, is the cost barrier, and some of the comments are around that, because the reality is it is an expensive, time-consuming process for the vendors. It's who willfully offers themselves up for an audit, and the jab is good. They'll expose you. And so it's not just the cost of the process itself. And I also think that also some of the questions are talking about sponsorship. It's a little bit of uncertainty of what the process is, and what are the steps, and what's a nice diagram for this. So there's cost on multiple levels: the cost of the process, the cost of technical remediation, the cost of preparing the packages, the cost of dealing with the POAMs, the continuous monitoring cost. Again, before you know it, it really piles up, and so I think this has been a really common refrain that we've heard. And then coupled with that, we've had, especially on the scientific side, in smaller companies, innovative companies, and there's questions related to about that. How do we have innovative companies? And then when you have them in that early stage where, their runway may not be that long, to get them to make an investment of that substantial cost can be really difficult for the FedRAMP process itself. So I do think there's another challenge that comes up is, okay, FedRAMP is one thing, but how are you building secure platforms to begin with? Because you obviously want to do that to be good stewards. But I just think the cost one is something that I have not seen a good answer for, and it is a huge barrier to entry for many folks in this space.
Excellent points. Thank you. Law, would you like to respond to anything that has been said so far?
Sure. I mean, first of all, from the challenge standpoint, I'd like to point out that workforce is an issue across the board. Just having people that understand the process, and then keeping a hold of people that understand the process, especially for the government agencies. It's hard to keep people inside the government agencies once they really become very used to the process. They get that knowledge, and then frankly, they leave for a different position or something like that. And maintaining a workforce that is knowledgeable in here is, I've seen that be a really big problem. And that workforce gets more increasingly expensive because of that, which is increasing the costs of the 3PAOs assessing your organizations. I mean, it's a never-ending loop of cost. Essentially, I agree with Sam that a challenge is definitely how much it costs to get through this process. And I think that'll get better with the adoption of FedRAMP, and with the act and saying that FedRAMP is the solidified authority. We'll start to see, like I said earlier, the bodies of knowledge, which will make it a little easier to get through that process, a little less costly, and we'll see an increased amount of people who actually understand how to get through it. But also to chime in, there are a lot of people asking about sponsors. So I just wanted to mention, and I back what Sam said. He said that you need to shop around, and you do. One of the purposes of a sponsor is to make sure that you actually have interest in your software to get inside of the FedRAMP process, because not only is it costly for you, but it's time consuming, from an authorization standpoint. And so if you're going to have something that's not successful, it'll be very problematic for you, and it can be problematic for the marketplace. So really shopping around and finding out if there is actually enough interest in your product to bother with FedRAMP. It's a very big price tag to get into something that you may not be successful in. And another way to do that, of course, is to reach out to people who do advisory services, and then they may have a road for you, and just doing a gap analysis and seeing whether it makes sense or not for your solution, and if so, maybe they can assist with getting you a sponsor.
Thank you. Jonathan, your hand was up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that we have done a lot of work with applications, particularly software as a service, where they have been having challenges with sponsors because it was software we wanted to use. We had it in our data center and worked with the vendor and the sponsoring agency to come up with how we could provide some support for assessments, how we could provide some support for ongoing activities to help move the assessment along and get that authorization out there. So, if you have a couple of customers and you're able to work through these questions with them, there are a lot of ways you can make some deals to get to where you need to be to get that authorization done.
Thank you. And Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, just completely agree with Law and Jonathan there. And even, at NCATS, I can speak, we've sponsored applications that we need and we're passionate about because it is work on us. But I agree completely with Jonathan just said with regards to, find other partners in the government to tin cup it, even the cost of, what you can incur, and really work collaboratively within the agencies. We do that all the time at NIH. We work closely with NCI, and we actually co-sponsored applications because it is burden on both sides. So it is interesting to see how much challenge that folks are having with sponsors. So yeah, definitely shop around, see who's using your product, and see who wants to champion it. I really do think that that's an important step.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments here based on what's been said, or if you see anything else in the chat that you'd like to address?
I think I'd just add one thing.
Sure.
So the initial process of going through FedRAMP is really difficult. And it's something that you are going to find easier if you partner with a sponsor that believes in you. If you find the right 3PAO, if you get the right guidance and assistance from people who have already gone down the path. I can tell you, after doing it the first time, all the mistakes that you made the first time around. When you do it the second time, you'll just make some different mistakes. The better advice that you can get from people that have the most experience doing this, it's going to make the process as easy as possible going through that initial assessment. And then I think maintenance ongoing maintenance, this is one of the things that the work that Zscaler did with Telos in putting together an SSP that was based on Rev 4. That was our investment for what's coming next, which is taking all of our products through Rev 5. Doing it the first time, we learned a lot, and we had and this was an example of partnering with somebody that really was providing that insight and information that was going to help us work through this process. Now going forward, we're hoping to take advantage of all that we learned on Rev 4 and be able to migrate those controls into Rev 5 much easier than if we had to try to do it manually.
Thank you, Greg. Anyone else?
Sure. I had a question that I saw pop up that I was going to go ahead and knock out as well. And that was essentially, how is essentially everyone trying to become cloud agnostic going to affect FedRAMP adoption? And it's going to increase it. The reason for that is centralization of security efforts across cloud platforms can become quite problematic. I mean, you look at 3 different cloud platforms and you're going to have 3 to 4 different ways of saying the exact same type of service to secure things. They call them different things, they say them different ways, and they may implement them slightly different. And with that, a centralization effort for compliance and regulation and helping you figure out how to implement security controls across those cloud providers and everything, it's important to be able to identify the differences and how to make them to mesh together essentially.
Yeah, thank you, Law. And Sam, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just completely agree with Law, and I want to comment on that just as one basic example of what Law is talking about is look at how they handle identity across the 3 major ones, Azure, AWS, and Google. It's all different, right? So if you want to have an agnostic approach and handle it, and that's, even we talk about Rev 5, how many recent failures have we seen that they're still not enforcing multi-factor authentication? Right. I mean, so sometimes, we get deep in the weeds, but some of the basics that were probably there in Rev 1 aren't implemented. And then you're going cloud agnostic in 3 different providers. And that's just one example of the control family. And that gets back to a point Carlos made of really understanding those and how they're implemented. And if you want to do cloud agnostic, you've almost tripled your work. So I know you want to get there, but sometimes some of the advice we give our people, we sponsor is, pick one. Like, I'd love in an ideal world to be cloud agnostic, but to get started that first iteration, pick a platform you have comfort with, especially technically, and that'll probably give you a better start. I mean, I know other people have differing opinions on that, but I think, it's a really challenging ask to begin with.
Thank you, Sam. And Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say as you start moving forward on your cloud journey, what you're going to find is that you want to start maximizing how you can save money. And then you start working into financial operations or FinOps and start looking at, if I add this capability in this cloud versus in this cloud, I'm going to see some savings, or I'm going to have to enable a few more services that I'm a little leery of because of the risks that they pose to my data and also to my costs. So it becomes a lot of juggling as you start looking at cloud agnostic, because you still have all of the same tools that you need to protect your data, all of the same requirements for incident response, all of the same local controls that I'm implementing to protect my data in that shared service. So it becomes a bit more of a headache and a bit more cumbersome, but you can work it through if you have the need and the resources.
Thank you. All right, I am going to call for our second poll question, and then I'm going to turn it back over to one of my questions that I have prepared. But poll question number 2 for folks at home: in your opinion, what is the most significant benefit of FedRAMP Rev 5 for government agencies and public sector organizations? We really want to hear what it is that you guys think. So that being said, there are a lot of audience questions that are coming through, which is really awesome. I hope, I don't know, some of them might be a little bit redundant, but if you as a panelist do want to continue to speak to any of those that you see, please, by all means, feel free to kind of tie those into the next question that I'm about to ask, which, Sam, I don't think we've started with you yet. I'd love to kind of ask you, what are some of the specific benefits and opportunities when it comes to state and local governments seeking to improve their cloud adoption through StateRAMP? And can you speak to how this relates to the broader goals of FedRAMP?
I think Carlos said something, since the federal government, it governs the entire nation and everything essentially, in my mind, cascades down from there. And I also explains to folks too, every individual on this call is their own CISO and privacy officer, right? Everyone's using a phone, everyone's using an email service, like you yourself, are taking responsibility. So I think the way that this will really help benefit is for them to learn from what's worked. And I do think, Jonathan touched on a huge point here when he just mentioned, FinOps, and down the road at the end of the day, again, for being federal, state, personal, cash is king. Ultimately, you're dictated by your finances, and you really reach that point of maturity that you're saving money. I think a lot of that one comes down to, because if you save that money, you have increased capability. So I think, where the state ramp can benefit is learning the best practices, learning what's worked, avoiding those pitfalls. I think Greg made a comment too, though, you go through one process, you learn things, then you go through the second time, you make all new mistakes. And that's just the nature of this, right? But how do you make those mistakes less costly? I do think someone else commented on this too, is even if, we want to expedite this process and get it more efficient, we still do have to be wary that the threat actors are out there and they're getting better, so we definitely want to make sure we have a push and we want to streamline it. But, those folks aren't sleeping. They're paying attention to what's happening. And so I do think that's a great point. But to me, I really think, learning what the government has done and learning what the vendors have done, it'll only benefit them as they try to adopt the state and the local level.
Thank you, Sam. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as Sam just said, you have to recognize that regardless of where it is, it's your data. You need to be comfortable with the protections in place. You need to be able to speak to the risks, both financial, reputational, and for PII, whatever you're protecting. So understanding what the cloud does and doesn't cover, understanding how it interacts with the local controls that you have in your own environment is going to go a long way towards having that good risk-informed discussion with all of your stakeholders to let them know this is what we're doing to protect the data. This is where the potential risks are. These are the factors we're using to mitigate, and this is the value we're getting out of it. So it's going to be a multi-factored, multi-layered conversation as you talk about your transition.
Thank you. And let's see, Carlos, do you have anything you'd like to add?
So one of the things that I've encountered is access issues. And so accessing the cloud, we use a virtual platform. And at times, there are software updates for government issued laptops, PDAs, and so forth that actually provide hiccups to us in terms of access. So on that level, we have to have due diligence about how we access the cloud, how we're engaging with the technology that we use every day. And then actually working with clients to have them understand that not everything is perfect, and not everything operates as according to plan. And so you have to do your due diligence there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. Would one of our industry folks like to weigh in on the discussion so far? Greg, go ahead.
So I know I spoke a little bit about state ramp and the adoption after FedRAMP, even before FedRAMP was fully authorized, or before the FedRAMP Act was in place. I think what you're seeing at the state level is taking a page from the federal government's book. I'm seeing more state and local agencies looking at their data and securing their data at the appropriate level, whether that's at the commercial level, FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP high even. And there are a lot more instances of data at the state and local level, especially if they're working with federal agencies, where you're seeing more of that FedRAMP high level. So appropriate, looking at what that data is and the associated risks and weighing the cost. I think you're seeing more state and local agencies now securing the data rather than and even if it means that it costs a little bit more, if the risk associated with it is going to be high. So I think a lot of the incidents that have happened at the federal and state level over the last several years have probably driven us in this direction, where state and local and federal agencies are a lot more conscious of having something not secured well enough versus paying the extra money to make sure that you are securing that data at the appropriate level.
Thank you, Greg. And
So I'm sorry, Kirsten, there was a question in the chat about FISMA versus FedRAMP and what's the connection. So FISMA is the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2014. They're in markup now for an update in 2023. That requires federal agencies in the civilian executive branch to outline how they are securing their data. They're, the low, moderate, and high level for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. There are a variety of controls there for physical security, for data security, and all the control families that you have to fill out. FedRAMP allows for, that's the Risk Authorization Management Program, which is run out of GSA, and they have a playbook for how cloud services or shared services can secure data using the FISMA control families, and writing a crosswalk of what's in the FISMA revision that we're using now, what we are applying at the cloud level that all users will be leveraging when they come into our cloud, versus the transitional and local controls. So I still have to set up my user authorization. I have to set up my browser configuration. And there are a variety of things that I still need to do locally to be able to leverage all the controls in the FedRAMP boundary using the FISMA control families. So there's a PATO, a provisional authorization by the sponsor or the JAB for these are what's in the cloud, and we're going to manage them through continuous monitoring. And then there's a mix of controls that you at the agency either need to partially implement in hybrid mode or fully implement. So that's how we get to the link up between FISMA and FedRAMP. So sorry about that, Kirsten.
No, thank you for addressing that. And Law, did you want to add anything else based on what's been discussed so far?
Sure. I mean, just, from a state ramp perspective, I know discussing that, the open visibility for security documentation in state ramp, it's a little different than the way it works in FedRAMP. So that's kind of awesome for state and local governments, as well as the fact that state ramp is really, and I say this I actually have a lot of conversations on this. One of my closest friends is a lead auditor for one of the states. And so we talk about the fact that there's certain things that lack from state level that the federal level's been doing it for a while, but state level's catching up, and it's different between states. And so that centralization of knowledge, and then having a program management office that these various different state and local organizations can reach out to for guidance on how to implement some security and how to obtain secure applications and things like that. It's a huge step forward for cybersecurity and risk management.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank y'all so much. So my last question was, and I want to hear from the government and the industry side on this, but quickly before we run out of time, for cloud service partners supporting their government clients, can you share what are some of the key best practices that should be considered to ensure compliance and that successful collaboration with FedRAMP? And I see Sam has his hand up. So Sam, please go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, and I would say to not be married to previous technical approaches that you've taken. And a route that I've seen companies take is they will reach out as an advisory 3PAO who's gone through the process to guide them in architecture, and then submit that to the JAB, and then use another 3PAO essentially. But one of the hangups that I've seen is going through that process can be very difficult and actually more costly to fix an existing architecture as opposed to potentially redesigning it. So it would just be flexible would be one of the key points of success that I've seen happen, because I've seen it go both ways, where they, stuck their guns. The other one, there was a question about the supply chain, and this is the other one I would be prepared for, is before you approach the JAB and FedRAMP, really make sure you understand all of your dependencies going back to the packages, because again, that's something that, I've seen just pop up from time to time, that they think they understand everything in the environment and the boundary, but they really don't until they get further downstream. And that's just another area to really make sure you have the full topology of everything that your SaaS or whatever it is using, because I've definitely seen surprises over time.
Yeah, appreciate that. And we have a few more minutes to kind of hang out here if anyone else wants to share their thoughts on that same question. Go ahead, Law.
There we go. Sorry. Sure. So one of the things I would say is just plan some more and then plan again, and then be ready to change your plan. Really being prepared for this, not just going into it and saying, hey, we're going to go for our FedRAMP, but really thinking about why you're going for your FedRAMP, who you're trying to go for with your FedRAMP, who your customer base is going to be, what problem you're actually solving, and then how you're going to you're actually going to secure that solution. One of the things we've seen from an advisory standpoint is we've seen a lot of groups that will go through this whole process of just, we can do it on our own. They spend about 6 months and a lot of money and figuring out that they can't do it on their own. And then they reach out to an advisory service, and they've just increased their timeline and their costs significantly. Even if it's just speaking to an advisory group, at the beginning of it, not, promising any money, not signing a contract or anything, but just speaking to someone so that you can find out where your gaps of knowledge are. And if you really know as much about the process as you think you do, will be huge in helping you plan and move along in that process, and just much more likely to become successful in it. And then groups that are familiar with NIST 853 control guidance are going to be much more successful than groups that aren't.
Thank you. And Carlos, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just say from the government side of things, understand that each system and each organization is different. So as we process systems, we need to be aware that even each system may have a budgetary setback or impact to working with FedRAMP. So, and what I'm thinking in mind is financial processing software or financial processing SaaS. We have to go and deal with budgetary issues with that. And so that impacts the total bottom line with FedRAMP. And then we begin to see how the organization will function, or the success or the failure of taking a particular SaaS to ATL, or the hindrance of it, the slowness of it, rather.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and then last two comments here, we'll go Jonathan and then Greg.
So I would say that what got you to this point in your technology journey is not what's going to get you to the finish line, and there is no finish line. So we keep having to modify what it is we're doing, how we want to go about doing it. We don't want to do exactly what we're doing today, but in the cloud. It's not going to save you any money. It's not going to get you any additional data. It's not going to get you any more efficiencies. So you need to think about, what is the ultimate goal here? How can I do things better, faster, stronger? How can I get that data so I can comply with the Evidence Act? How can I get that data so I can comply with the AI strategy? How can I use what I'm doing now to move my technology along and to keep modernizing so I can be more effective and efficient? And how do I protect my data, whether it's in the cloud, on my phone, or on my computer? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Greg.
Just to reiterate what I said before, partner with groups, your 3PAO and others that have gone down the path and have been successful in doing it. Be patient. Because I heard one person say plan, and then plan again, and that's exactly how it works. It is something that you're going to create a living document for your FedRAMP boundary that is going to be continually updated with features for as long as that product exists in FedRAMP. So it is a long process to get started. It is a process that is designed to continually improve over time. And I think it's probably FedRAMP's greatest strength, is that nobody's looking at saying, okay, the process is good enough. They're always looking at how are we going to make it better? How are we going to make it a little easier? How can we make it easier for the agencies to adopt controls after something is accredited for their ATO process? And I think all of those things are, fundamental in people being successful in using FedRAMP services.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, third poll question up on the screen here, and then we're going to get into our round of takeaways. So which aspect of cloud adoption in government do you think requires the most attention for successful implementation? Folks at home, we'd love to hear from you. And I got to say, I've been doing this since like 2020, at least once a week, and I've never had this many audience questions come through. So I think that there is obviously a lot of interest on the subject. We'll have to do another webinar as a follow-up to all of the things that we didn't yet get to discuss, but this has been really wonderful. So to kind of round things out, I want to hear from each of you. You've got the floor for about a minute. If you can only leave the audience with one takeaway from this entire discussion that we've had, and I know we've covered a lot of ground, but just one takeaway, what would that be for the folks at home, or something that maybe you've learned yourself through this conversation? And Sam, if we could start with you, and then we'll just go around and hear from everyone. I think that'll be a good way to round it out.
Yeah, I think regardless of FedRAMP, I think when it comes to applications and their usage, and this has been a theme, from everyone talking about this, and Jonathan has touched on this, think about it from the data perspective and build your applications with a security first mentality. That'll definitely help you. I think it's just, becoming more and more prevalent, in society, and more pervasive, as half of our modern life, it seems, runoff cloud-based services and platforms. So really take that security first mentality and start with security instead of a bolt-on after the fact. It's not nearly as bad as it was in the past, but I really think that security first posture will put you in a good position if you do start going towards things like FedRAMP approval.
Yeah, thank you. And Carlos, let's hear from you next.
Yes, my takeaway from this conversation is definitely focused on utilizing FedRAMP to do forward thinking. And where I'm going with that is, I mentioned earlier the OSCAL and how things would be kind of sped up in terms of how we produce documentation, how we store documentation, how we engage on various software platforms, or how we take a particular software system all the way to ATO. Just to be keenly aware that things change over time. I mentioned earlier that when we talked about policy, we started in 2023. Where are we going to be in 2025? That's a good question. I noticed that there was a question that was asked about AI and how that will impact FedRAMP going forward. If we move from state FISMA to FedRAMP, where are we going next? And so that's the kind of takeaway I want to contribute here.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. And Jonathan, let's hear from you next.
So I'd start with a riff on an advertising campaign. It's your data, protect it the way you need to. But also looking forward is going to be very important for what's happening with FedRAMP. Microsoft is already going to be including Copilot in their FedRAMP in the next few months. So be prepared for it. What's that going to mean for your data? How is it going to be trained? Google is going to include BARD in theirs in a few months. So be careful. What does that mean for your data? How is that AI trained? Keep thinking about the data as the main point of your discussions with the cloud.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's go to Law next.
I apologize. I have 2 mutes. All right. So as far as the takeaway, I mean, I go back to what I said earlier, plan again, just keep really consider what you're doing and who you're going after. And then keep up with the emerging technologies. Carlos was talking about AI, and then you've got things such as OSCAL that are coming out that's going to make OSCAL's out. It's just, as it becomes more heavily adopted, I should say, it's going to standardize and centralize things to make things a little easier. I mean, being able to crosswalk across frameworks is huge. A lot of groups have to have multiple frameworks that they have to consider. And that's, I completely agree with the statement of think about the data you're protecting. And when you think about that data that you're protecting, build your own internal framework that encompasses all the different frameworks that need to be accomplished, and then build those security features and those processes across the board to help manage everything a little easier.
Thank you. And Greg, we'll end our takeaways with you.
Yeah, I'd reiterate the secure by design philosophy. The earlier in your process that you develop or understand where your gaps and where those security controls are required for your product, the less costly it's going to be later. You're going to be much farther down the road when you start the FedRAMP process if you do all of that gap analysis up front.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. This has been such a great discussion. And we do have a final poll for the folks who've stuck around to the end, which is still a lot of people. So don't forget to respond to this one for your CPE credit. If you've completed all the polls today and you'd like to receive it, just let us know so that we can send it to you. And of course, I want to thank our partners again at Zscaler and Telos for helping us make today's webinar possible. And the folks at home who've been so interactive with us. We do, in fact, capture all of the questions that we didn't necessarily get to hit on. So we can always follow up with our panelists. If they're willing to share their responses later on, we'll do our best to send those out and get you that information, especially if it's pressing. So yeah, I just want to say thanks everyone so much for their time today. And if you enjoyed this session, you'll probably be interested in our next one, which is on November 14th. And this is on the quantum leap, space energy and collaborative innovation. We're going to hear from Dana Lynette at Artificial Brain Tech. So we hope to see you all there. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsten.